It was a bright Tuesday afternoon in April when Sarah Johnson finished her last class at Winchester Elementary School. As a dedicated third grade teacher, she had spent the day helping her students master fractions and encouraging their creative writing projects. The clock showed 3:15 p.m., and like every Tuesday, it was time to pick up her daughter Maya from piano lessons. Sarah gathered her belongings, straightening the family photo on her desk that showed her husband Marcus, and their daughter Maya at the beach last summer. She smiled at the memory as she grabbed her purse and car keys. The halls were still buzzing with children heading to after-school activities, and several students waved goodbye as she walked to her car. The drive to Miss Patricia's music studio was familiar, a route she had taken every Tuesday for the past year since Maya had begged to learn piano. The spring weather was perfect, with cherry blossoms lining the suburban streets of their Atlanta neighborhood. Sarah hummed along to the soft jazz playing on her car radio, looking forward to hearing about Maya's progress. At exactly 3:30 p.m., Sarah pulled into the small parking lot of the converted Victorian house that served as the music studio. Through the large bay window, she could see Maya sitting at the grand piano, her small fingers moving across the keys as Miss Patricia nodded approvingly beside her. Sarah's heart swelled with pride. Maya had inherited her father's natural talent for music. Inside the studio, the final notes of Etherealize filled the air as Maya finished her practice piece. The 8-year-old's face lit up when she saw her mother in the doorway. "Mommy, did you hear me play?" Maya jumped up from the piano bench, her dark braids bouncing with excitement. "You're making wonderful progress, Maya," Miss Patricia said, adjusting her reading glasses. "Keep practicing that section we worked on today, and next week we'll start preparing for the summer recital." Sarah thanked the instructor and helped Maya pack up her sheet music. As they walked to the car, Maya chatted enthusiastically about the upcoming recital. "I want to wear my blue dress, the one with the sparkly belt," she declared, climbing into the back seat. "And can we invite Grandma and Grandpa?" "Of course we can, sweetie," Sarah replied, making sure Maya's seatbelt was secure. "Daddy will record the whole thing, just like last time." She checked her watch. They had plenty of time to stop by the grocery store before heading home to start dinner. The afternoon sun was warm through the car windows as they drove down Palmer Street. Maya had pulled out her practice sheets, humming the melody she'd just learned. Sarah glanced at her daughter in the rearview mirror, touched by how much Maya resembled Marcus when she was deep in concentration. "Mom, can we have spaghetti for dinner?" Maya asked, looking up from her music. "And can I help make the sauce like last time?" "That sounds perfect," Sarah agreed, thinking about the fresh basil she had growing in their kitchen window. Cooking together had become their special bonding time, with Maya showing more interest in helping prepare family meals. They were just a few blocks from the grocery store when Sarah noticed a police cruiser in her rearview mirror. She automatically checked her speed, 32 in a 35 zone, and made sure to signal as she approached the next stop sign. The police car followed closely behind. Sarah took a deep breath, remembering the conversations she and Marcus had with Maya about staying calm during police encounters. As a civil rights attorney, Marcus had always emphasized the importance of knowing their rights while remaining respectful. Still, Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly as she came to a complete stop at the intersection. The police cruiser's lights suddenly flashed on. Sarah carefully pulled over to the right, positioning her car well out of traffic. She reached for her purse, where she kept her license and registration easily accessible, another habit Marcus had suggested. "Mommy?" Maya's voice was small and uncertain from the back seat. "Everything's fine, baby," Sarah said calmly, though she felt a knot forming in her stomach. "Remember what Daddy taught us? We'll just be polite and follow instructions." As she watched the officer approach in her side mirror, Sarah had no way of knowing that this routine traffic stop was about to become anything but routine. She couldn't have imagined that the next few minutes would change their lives forever, or that her husband's teachings about dealing with law enforcement would be put to the ultimate test. Officer Michael Reynolds stepped out of his patrol car, adjusting his sunglasses with one hand while the other rested near his belt. He had been on the force for 12 years, and his record showed a pattern that his superiors had repeatedly overlooked. The dashboard camera would later reveal that he had followed Sarah's car for 3 blocks before activating his lights. As he approached the driver's side window, Sarah kept both hands visible on the steering wheel, just as Marcus had always instructed. Through her side mirror, She noticed the officer's rigid posture and the way his jaw seemed clenched beneath his clean-shaven face. "License and registration," Reynolds barked, not bothering with any formal greeting. His tone was sharp enough to make Maya sink lower in her back seat. "Yes, officer," Sarah replied calmly, slowly reaching for her purse. "My registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to get that for you as well. Did I say you could move?" Reynolds snapped, his hand moving to rest on his weapon. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Sarah froze, her heart pounding but her voice remaining steady. "I apologize, officer. Would you like me to get my documents one at a time?" Reynolds leaned closer to the window, his face twisted in a scowl. "You ran that stop sign back there. You think you could just break the law because you're in a hurry?" "Sir, I'm certain I came to a complete stop," Sarah responded respectfully. "I always do, especially with my daughter in the car." The mention of her daughter seemed to irritate Reynolds further. He shined his flashlight directly into the back seat, causing Maya to squint and turn away. "Got something to hide back there?" "No, sir, that's my 8-year-old daughter. We're just returning from her piano lesson." Sarah could hear Maya's frightened breathing behind her. "Step out of the vehicle," Reynolds demanded, his hand now gripping his weapon's handle. Sarah's teacher instincts kicked in as she tried to keep the situation calm. "Officer, may I ask why I need to exit the vehicle? I'm happy to provide my documentation." "I said get out of the car," Reynolds shouted, yanking the door handle. "Are you refusing to comply with a police officer?" Several passing cars had begun to slow down, their drivers watching the escalating scene. A woman walking her dog across the street had stopped, pulling out her phone. "Mommy?" Maya's voice trembled. "I'm scared." "It's okay, baby," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Everything's going to be fine. Just stay in your seat and be very still." Reynolds reached into the car, grabbing Sarah's arm. "Out! Now! Officer, please." Sarah winced at his grip. "You're hurting me. Let me unfasten my seatbelt properly." "Should have thought about that before you decided to be uncooperative," Reynolds growled, pulling harder. Sarah managed to press the emergency button on her phone, another safety measure Marcus had insisted on, before Reynolds dragged her from the car. The force of his pull caused her to stumble, her shoe catching on the doorframe. More cars were stopping now. One driver rolled down his window, calling out, "Hey, what are you doing? She didn't do anything wrong." "Stay out of this," Reynolds shouted at the bystander. "This is police business." Maya had begun crying in earnest now, her small hands pressed against the window. "Please don't hurt my mommy, please." Sarah tried to turn toward her daughter, to offer some reassurance, but Reynolds yanked her arm harder. "Face the vehicle, spread your legs." "Officer, this isn't necessary," Sarah said, her professional composure starting to crack. "My license shows I'm a teacher at Winchester Elementary. I have no record. Please, my daughter is terrified." "I don't care what you are," Reynolds snarled, pressing her against the car. "You people always think you're special, always think you can talk your way out of everything." The growing crowd of witnesses had their phones out now, recording the incident. A teenage girl on the sidewalk was live streaming, her commentary filled with outrage. But Reynolds seemed beyond caring about the audience, his face red with anger as he reached for his handcuffs. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, praying that Maya wouldn't be too traumatized by what was happening, praying that someone had called Marcus, praying that this officer's rage wouldn't escalate further. But as Reynolds' grip tightened on her wrists, she feared those prayers were about to go unanswered. The world seemed to move in slow motion as Officer Reynolds spun Sarah around, slamming her back against the car door. Maya's screams from inside the vehicle pierced the air, but Reynolds appeared deaf to the child's distress. The growing crowd of onlookers had swelled to nearly 24 people, their phones recording every moment of the escalating situation. "Stop resisting," Reynolds shouted, though Sarah hadn't moved except to absorb the impact of being thrown against her car. "I'm not resisting," Sarah said through gritted teeth, fighting to maintain her composure. "Please, officer, my daughter is watching. She's just a child." The mention of Maya only seemed to fuel Reynolds' anger. He pressed his forearm against Sarah's chest, pushing her harder against the vehicle. "Should have thought about your kid before you decided to be difficult." Inside the car, Maya had managed to unbuckle her seatbelt and scramble to the front seat. With trembling hands, she grabbed her mother's phone from where it had fallen during the initial struggle. Through her tears, she found her father's contact photo, Marcus smiling in his suit from last year's law firm party. Reynolds noticed the movement in the car. "Hey, don't you move in there," he shouted at Maya, causing her to flinch but not stop her determined fingers from pressing the call button. "Daddy," Maya sobbed when Marcus answered. "Daddy, please come quick. A bad police officer is hurting Mommy." Outside, more cars had stopped, creating an impromptu traffic jam. A middle-aged woman stepped forward from the crowd, identifying herself as a nurse. "Officer, I'm a medical professional. That woman can't breathe properly in that position." "Back up," Reynolds barked. "This is a police matter. Interfere, and you'll be arrested for obstruction." Sarah felt her chest tightening as Reynolds' weight pressed against her. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. She thought of her classroom, of the bright faces of her students who would be wondering where she was tomorrow. She thought of the dinner she had promised to cook with Maya, the spaghetti sauce they would never make tonight. "Please," she wheezed. "I can't breathe." A young man in the crowd shouted, "Take your body camera footage now, officer. We all see what you're doing." Reynolds reached up with one hand and deliberately turned off his body camera. The action drew gasps from the witnesses, and several people moved closer, making sure their phones captured every detail. Maya was still on the phone with Marcus, her voice high and frightened as she described their location. "We're by the grocery store, Daddy. The one with the big blue sign. Please hurry." Sarah's legs were beginning to shake from the strain of Reynolds' pressure. She could hear her daughter's voice, could hear the concerned shouts from the crowd, but everything was starting to sound distant and muffled. Her chest burned with the effort to draw breath. "Officer Reynolds." A new voice cut through the chaos, another police officer who had just arrived on scene. "What's the situation here?" Reynolds barely acknowledged his colleague. "Got a resistant subject. She ran a stop sign and got confrontational." The second officer, a younger woman named Martinez according to her nameplate, surveyed the scene with growing concern. She saw the crying child in the car, the crowd of horrified onlookers, and the clearly struggling woman pinned against the vehicle. "Sir," Officer Martinez said carefully, "maybe we should." Before she could finish, a black BMW screeched to a halt across the street. Marcus Johnson stepped out, his suit jacket fluttering as he rushed toward the scene. His face was a mask of controlled fury as he assessed the situation. His wife struggling to breathe, his daughter hysterical in the car, and a police officer clearly abusing his power. Reynolds saw Marcus approaching and shifted his grip on Sarah, one hand moving toward his throat. The crowd's voices rose in alarm as Sarah gasped for air, her eyes widening in panic. "Don't take another step," Reynolds shouted at Marcus, but his voice carried an edge of uncertainty now. He hadn't expected the well-dressed man striding toward him, hadn't counted on facing someone who knew exactly how many laws he was breaking in this moment. The confrontation was about to take a turn that would change everyone involved forever, and the dozens of phone cameras kept rolling, documenting every second. Marcus Johnson approached the scene with the calculated precision that had made him one of Atlanta's most respected civil rights attorneys. His hands were raised, showing he carried no weapon, but his voice carried the weight of 15 years of courtroom authority. "I am Marcus Johnson, attorney at law," he announced clearly, loud enough for all the recording phones to pick up. "Officer Reynolds, you're currently violating Georgia Code Section 16 to 521 by committing aggravated assault against my wife, Sarah Johnson." Reynolds' grip on Sarah's throat tightened reflexively. "Stay back. This is a police matter." "Your body camera is off, which violates Department Policy 8.42, Marcus continued, taking measured steps forward. "You have no probable cause for this stop, and you're using excessive force in front of multiple witnesses, including a minor child." Officer Martinez had moved closer, her own body camera prominently displaying its red recording light. She could see Sarah's face turning an alarming shade of purple as Reynolds' chokehold restricted her airway. "Reynolds," Martinez said sharply, "release your hold. Now." Maya's face was pressed against the car window, her small hands leaving foggy prints on the glass. "Daddy," she cried out, "he's hurting her." Marcus kept his eyes locked on Reynolds while addressing Officer Martinez. "Officer, I need you to document that your fellow officer has turned off his body camera, is using an illegal chokehold, and is causing visible distress to a compliant civilian." The crowd had grown larger, their phones capturing every word. The nurse who had spoken up earlier called out, "Her lips are turning blue. She needs medical attention." Reynolds' face was beaded with sweat now, his composure cracking as he realized the severity of his situation. Still, his grip didn't loosen. She was resisting arrest. "The dashcam footage will show she made a complete stop," Marcus stated, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "The witness's videos show she was compliant. Release my wife immediately, or I promise you'll be facing more than just departmental charges." Officer Martinez had drawn closer, her hand now on her radio. "Central, this is Unit 247. I need a supervisor at my location immediately. Officer involved situation, civilian in distress." Reynolds' eyes darted between Marcus, Martinez, and the crowd. His hand trembled slightly against Sarah's throat as the reality of his actions began to sink in. "Last warning," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "Remove your hands from my wife, or I will personally ensure that every second of this incident plays on every news channel in the country. Your career isn't just over, your freedom is on the line." Sarah's knees had begun to buckle, her consciousness fading. Reynolds felt her starting to slip and finally, with a sudden movement, released his hold. Sarah collapsed forward, gasping desperately for air. Marcus rushed to catch her before she hit the ground. Officer Martinez moved quickly, positioning herself between Reynolds and the Johnsons. "Step back, Reynolds. Your supervisor is en route." Maya had somehow managed to open the car door and ran to her parents, throwing her arms around her mother's waist as Sarah slowly regained her breath. Marcus held them both, his lawyer's composure finally cracking as he felt his wife trembling against him. The crowd had erupted in a mixture of cheers and angry shouts. Reynolds stood awkwardly, his authority evaporating as 3 more police cars pulled up to the scene, lights flashing. "I can't believe you did this in front of my daughter," Sarah managed to say between deep breaths, her voice raspy from the chokehold. "Baby, are you okay?" Marcus asked softly, examining the red marks on her neck. "Can you breathe?" Sarah nodded weakly, holding Maya closer. The little girl was still crying, but softer now, her face buried in her mother's shirt. A police sergeant emerged from one of the newly arrived vehicles, taking in the scene with experienced eyes. The crowd of witnesses immediately began calling out descriptions of what they'd witnessed, holding up their phones as evidence. Marcus straightened up, keeping one arm around his family while addressing the sergeant. "I want to file a formal complaint," he said firmly. "And then I want an ambulance for my wife. After that, we're going to have a very serious discussion about reform in your department." The nightmare wasn't over, but at least Sarah could breathe again. As she held her daughter and leaned against her husband, she knew this incident would become more than just another case of police brutality. It would become a catalyst for change. Sergeant David Chen took control of the scene with practiced efficiency. His 20 years on the force had taught him to recognize a powder cake when he saw one, and this situation was explosive. The crowd of witnesses had swelled to nearly 50 people, their phones still recording every movement. "Officer Reynolds," Chen commanded, "surrender your weapon and badge to Officer Martinez. Then wait in your patrol car." Reynolds' face flushed red. "Sergeant, I was just—" "That wasn't a suggestion." Chen cut him off sharply. "Now." As Reynolds reluctantly handed over his equipment, paramedics arrived on scene. Sarah sat on the back step of the ambulance while an EMT named Rodriguez examined the angry red marks around her neck. Maya refused to let go of her mother's hand, watching with wide, frightened eyes as the medical team worked. "Mrs. Johnson, can you swallow for me?" Rodriguez asked gently, pressing careful fingers against Sarah's throat. "Any sharp pain?" Sarah managed to swallow, wincing. "It hurts, but I can do it." Marcus stood nearby, dividing his attention between his family and his phone as he made rapid-fire calls. "Yes, Judge Morris. I need an emergency injunction." "No, this can't wait until morning." "Yes, I have video evidence from multiple sources." The sergeant approached the ambulance, his notepad ready. "Mrs. Johnson, I know this is difficult, but I need to get your statement while events are fresh." Before Sarah could respond, Marcus interrupted his phone call. My wife needs medical attention first. We'll provide statements once she's been properly examined at the hospital. Of course, Chen agreed, then hesitated. But you should know, this isn't Reynolds' first incident. Marcus's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Chen glanced around, lowering his voice. There have been complaints. Similar situations, but nothing ever stuck because the department protected him. Marcus finished, his jaw tightening. Not this time. This time there are dozens of witnesses and multiple videos. Meanwhile, Maya had finally found her voice again. Mommy, she whispered, is the bad policeman going to come back? Sarah pulled her daughter closer, ignoring the pain in her throat. No, baby. Daddy's going to make sure he never hurts anyone again. More police vehicles had arrived, including internal affairs investigators who began collecting witness statements and phone numbers from the crowd. The original videos were already spreading across social media, with local news vans pulling up to the scene. Rodriguez finished his examination of Sarah. Mrs. Johnson, I strongly recommend you come to the hospital for a full assessment. There could be internal swelling we can't see. Marcus nodded, helping Sarah to her feet. We're going. But first, he turned to Sergeant Chen. I want Reynolds arrested. Now, in front of all these cameras. Chen looked uncomfortable. That's not standard procedure. Your officer assaulted my wife on camera, turned off his body cam to hide evidence, and used an illegal chokehold, Marcus stated firmly. If you don't arrest him now, I'll have a press conference right here explaining why. The sergeant knew a losing battle when he saw one. He walked to Reynolds' patrol car and opened the door. Step out, Michael. The crowd fell silent as Reynolds emerged, his arrogance replaced by uncertainty. Officer Martinez stepped forward with handcuffs. Michael Reynolds, Chen announced clearly, you're under arrest for aggravated assault, excessive use of force, and violation of department policies. You have the right to remain silent. As the Miranda rights were read, Sarah held Maya close, shielding her daughter's eyes from the scene. But Maya peeked anyway, watching as the man who had hurt her mother was led away in handcuffs. Come on, Marcus said softly to his family. Let's get to the hospital. This is just the beginning. As they walked to Marcus's car, the crowd parted respectfully. Several people reached out to touch Sarah's shoulder or offer quiet words of support. A young girl about Maya's age handed her a flower she'd picked from a nearby bush. Sarah's throat ached, and she knew harder days lay ahead. Depositions, court appearances, media attention. But as she looked at her husband's determined face and felt her daughter's small hand in hers, she knew they would face it together. Sometimes, she thought, it takes a nightmare to wake people up to the need for change. What no one knew yet was that this incident would become a turning point, not just for their family, but for the entire city's approach to police reform. The emergency room at Atlanta General Hospital buzzed with activity as Dr. Amelia Carter examined the growing bruises on Sarah's neck. The bruising pattern clearly shows excessive force, Dr. Carter explained, her voice professional but tinged with concern. These marks here indicate a sustained chokehold lasting at least 2 minutes, possibly longer. Marcus stood beside the examination table, his laptop open as he reviewed the flood of videos pouring in from witnesses. His legal assistant, James, had already collected 37 different angles of the incident, each more damning than the last. Look at this, James said, pointing to his screen. 3 months ago, another black woman filed a complaint against Reynolds. The department buried it. Maya had finally fallen asleep in a chair nearby, exhausted from crying. A kind nurse had draped a blanket over her and brought her a stuffed bear from the pediatric ward. Even in sleep, her small hand clutched her mother's phone tightly. The hospital room door opened, and Detective Lisa Wong from Internal Affairs entered, carrying a thick folder. Mr. Johnson, we've pulled Reynolds' complete record. It's worse than we thought. Sarah tried to sit up straighter, wincing at the pain. How many others? 12 complaints in the past year alone, Wong replied, spreading documents across the small table. All involving minority women, all during routine traffic stops. This is the first time we have clear video evidence. Marcus studied the papers, his attorney's mind cataloging each detail. The department knew. They'd had to know this pattern existed. They did, Wong confirmed. There's more. Reynolds turned off his body camera today, but he forgot about his dash cam. We've retrieved the footage. She pulled out her tablet, playing the video. The image clearly showed Sarah's car coming to a complete stop at the intersection. There had been no violation, no probable cause for the stop. What about his previous body camera footage? Marcus asked, already suspecting the answer. Wong's face darkened. Conveniently corrupted or missing from multiple incidents. But here's what's interesting. His partner from last year filed a formal report about Reynolds' behavior. 2 days later, she was transferred to traffic duty. Sarah's hand went to her throat, remembering the terrifying pressure. "You could have killed me, in front of my daughter." "He's done this before," Wong said quietly, but the victims were too scared to pursue charges, or their complaints were dismissed. Your case is different. You have witnesses, videos, medical evidence, and a husband who knows how to use them. Marcus closed his laptop decisively. "I want every officer who covered for him charged as accessories. Every supervisor who ignored complaints needs to be held accountable." The door opened again, and a familiar face appeared. City Council member Patricia Henderson. She took in the scene. Sarah's injuries, the sleeping child, the scattered evidence of systemic failure. "I came as soon as I heard," Henderson said. "The mayor's office is in damage control mode, but this time they can't hide behind procedure." "Pat." Marcus acknowledged his old friend. "We need emergency council sessions. The entire department needs review." "Already scheduled for tomorrow morning," Henderson confirmed. "And the FBI Civil Rights Division is sending investigators. This case could reshape police accountability across the state." Dr. Carter finished her examination, adding final notes to Sarah's chart. "Mrs. Johnson, the swelling should decrease within a few days, but the psychological trauma. Have you considered counseling? For both you and Maya?" Sarah looked at her sleeping daughter, remembering her screams of terror. "Yes, we'll all need help processing this." Marcus gathered the evidence files, his expression determined. "First, we make sure Reynolds never wears a badge again. Then we change the system that protected him." Outside the hospital room, reporters had gathered, held back by hospital security. The story was spreading rapidly across social media, with hashtags demanding justice and reform trending nationwide. Sarah reached for Marcus's hand, drawing strength from his presence. "I keep thinking about my students," she said softly. "How many of their parents have faced this kind of abuse in silence?" "Not anymore," Marcus promised. Reynolds thought he was choosing an easy target. Instead, he chose the family that's going to end his career and transform the department. Maya stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about bad police. Sarah brushed her daughter's hair back gently, wondering how long it would take for the nightmares to fade. But as she looked at the mountain of evidence growing on the table, she knew that their trauma would serve a purpose. Change was coming, and it would start with them. The city council chambers were packed to capacity 3 days after the incident. News cameras lined the back wall, their lenses focused on the podium where Police Chief Thomas Bradford shifted uncomfortably under the harsh lights. "What we've uncovered is deeply disturbing," Bradford admitted, his usual confidence absent. "Officer Reynolds' personnel file contains evidence of systematic misconduct that was deliberately concealed from the public and higher authorities." Marcus sat in the front row, surrounded by a team of civil rights attorneys. On his laptop screen, a database tracked similar incidents across the country, revealing a pattern that stretched far beyond their city. Sarah had chosen to stay home with Maya, both still recovering from their ordeal, but their presence was felt through the large screen behind the council members, displaying the viral video of Reynolds' attack that had now been viewed millions of times. "We have evidence," Council Member Henderson announced, "that at least 4 senior officers actively participated in covering up Officer Reynolds' previous incidents of racial profiling and excessive force." The chamber erupted in angry murmurs as Henderson projected documentation onto the screen. Email chains, altered reports, and buried complaints appeared one after another, each more damning than the last. "Over the past 5 years," Henderson continued, "Reynolds conducted 1,247 traffic stops. 87% involved minority drivers, predominantly women. The department's own data analysts flagged this pattern 3 years ago, but their report was suppressed." In the second row, Detective Wong watched with grim satisfaction as her months of quiet investigation finally came to light. She had been building this case long before Reynolds attacked Sarah, waiting for an incident that couldn't be buried. Former Officer Janet Martinez, Reynolds' one-time partner who had been demoted for reporting his behavior, took the podium next. I witnessed Officer Reynolds escalate routine stops into violent confrontations at least dozen times. Each time I reported it, I was told to be a team player or face consequences. The testimony continued for hours. More victims came forward, their stories painfully similar to Sarah's experience. Some brought children who had witnessed their parents' abuse, their young faces haunting reminders of Maya's trauma. Back at home, Sarah watched the proceedings on TV while Maya rested against her side. The bruises on her neck had faded to a sickly yellow, but the memory of Reynolds' grip still woke her at night. "Mom," Maya asked quietly, "are they going to make sure the bad policeman never hurts anyone again?" Sarah hugged her daughter closer. "Yes, baby. Daddy and a lot of other brave people are making sure of that right now." At the council chambers, Marcus approached the podium for his closing statement. The room fell silent, cameras zooming in on his face. "What happened to my wife and daughter reflects a deeper sickness in our law enforcement system," he began. "Officer Reynolds isn't just one bad apple. He's the product of a culture that protects abusers and punishes those who speak up." He held up a thick stack of papers. "I have here signed statements from 23 officers currently serving in our department, all willing to testify about the retaliation they face for reporting misconduct. This stops today." Chief Bradford's resignation was announced before the session ended. 4 senior officers were placed on immediate administrative leave pending criminal investigation. The FBI confirmed they were expanding their probe to include possible civil rights violations dating back a decade. As the chambers emptied, Detective Wong approached Marcus with a fresh file. "You'll want to see this," she said quietly. "We found Reynolds' private text messages. He wasn't just targeting random minorities. He was deliberately profiling successful black women. He saw them as uppity, to use his own words." Marcus took the file, his hand steady despite his anger. "Send copies to the federal prosecutors. This proves the hate crime enhancement." Outside, a group of protesters had gathered, but not to demonstrate against the police. Their signs supported the officers who had come forward, demanding protection for whistleblowers and real accountability. The evening news led with footage from the council session, experts analyzing every new revelation. But the most powerful image was a split screen. Reynolds being led away in handcuffs contrasted with Sarah and Maya's first photo after leaving the hospital, both survivors showing strength in their eyes despite their obvious pain. Change was happening, not just in policies and procedures, but in the fundamental understanding of what police accountability meant. The truth had emerged, and there would be no going back to the old ways of silence and cover-ups. 6 months after the incident, Sarah Johnson stood before a packed auditorium at Winchester Elementary School. The event was titled "Community and Police, Building Trust Together," and she was the keynote speaker. In the front row, Maya sat between Marcus and Officer Martinez, who had become a regular visitor to their home. "What happened to me was terrible," Sarah began, her voice strong and clear. "But what came after has given me hope. Real change isn't just about removing bad officers, it's about creating a system where good officers can speak up without fear." The audience included police officers, community leaders, and families who had been affected by similar incidents. Former Chief Bradford sat in the back, now working as a consultant for police reform after testifying against his former colleagues. Michael Reynolds' trial had concluded 2 weeks earlier. The jury took only 4 hours to find him guilty on all counts, including civil rights violations and aggravated assault. His sentencing was scheduled for the following month, with federal prosecutors recommending the maximum term. "Because of what we went through," Sarah continued, gesturing to Maya, "our department now has new policies. Body cameras that can't be turned off during stops, mandatory reporting of racial profiling patterns, protection for officers who report misconduct." Detective Wong, recently promoted to head the new Internal Affairs Reform Unit, nodded from her seat. The changes hadn't been easy, but they were working. Complaint numbers were down, and officer morale had actually improved as the toxic culture began to shift. Maya stood up next, walking confidently to join her mother at the podium. At 9 years old, she had become the youngest member of the Children's Advisory Board for Police Community Relations, a new program that helped kids understand their rights while building positive relationships with law enforcement. "I was really scared when the bad policeman hurt my mom," Maya said into the microphone. "But now I know there are more good police officers than bad ones, like Officer Martinez, who comes to my piano recitals." The audience applauded as Martinez wiped away a tear. She had become something of a department hero, her early stands against Reynolds now seen as a model of police integrity. Marcus joined his family at the podium, carrying a thick folder. "Today, we're announcing the Sarah Johnson Police Accountability Act, which will be introduced in the state legislature next month. This law will create independent oversight boards in every county and require immediate investigation of any pattern of discriminatory stops." The changes hadn't been limited to their city. Departments across the country had studied the Reynolds case, implementing reforms before similar incidents could occur. The videos of Sarah's assault had become teaching tools in police academies, showing exactly what not to do and how implicit bias could turn deadly. "But the most important change," Sarah said, holding Maya's hand, "is in how we see each other. My daughter no longer flinches when she sees a police car. Officers in our neighborhood stop to chat with kids playing outside. We're building trust, one interaction at a time." The program concluded with the announcement of a new scholarship fund for children affected by police misconduct, funded by civil settlements from Reynolds and the officers who had covered for him. Maya would help select the first recipients. After the event, families lingered in the school hallway, sharing stories and strategies. Sarah watched as Maya showed Officer Martinez her latest piano piece on the music room piano, the fear of that terrible day replaced by hope for a better future. "You know," Marcus said, putting his arm around Sarah, "when I first saw Reynolds hurting you, I wanted revenge. But this, creating real change, helping other families, watching Maya heal, this is better." Sarah leaned against her husband, touching the barely visible scar on her neck. "We turned our trauma into transformation. That's what I tell my students now. Bad things happen, but it's what we do afterward that defines us." Outside, the sun was setting on a community forever changed by one traffic stop that went horribly wrong. But from that darkness had come light. New laws, new leaders, new understanding. And in a music room down the hall, a little girl played piano for a police officer, showing that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt note by note, day by day, person by person. The story of Sarah Johnson and Officer Reynolds would be remembered not just as a tragedy narrowly averted, but as the catalyst that sparked a movement that proved change was possible when people stood together and demanded better from those sworn to protect and serve. The end wasn't just justice served, it was justice transformed.